Translator, Ninetales. Editor, Fish Creek. I am the Rain Hall Master of our sacred cult. The people of the rivers and lakes call me Little Rainbringer. Are your spell arts any good? Qin Mu stepped into the next chamber, and within sat a woman. Strange tattoos sprawled across her face, and upon her head she wore a victorious feathered headdress. In her hand she held a staff fashioned from the tail of some unknown beast, bearing 24 joints to match the 24 solar terms. The woman smiled and said, "Shall we spar, using spells in this room?" Qin Mu shook his head. "I do not know any spells. Can those who cultivate the spirit embryo realm learn spells as well?" The woman smiled. "Why not? Vital Qi is magic power. Once you know spells, you can cast them. The cult mistress was the finest spellcaster in our cult. Did she not teach you? When I was still in the spirit embryo realm, I had already wandered the martial world, using spells to summon rain for the common folk. Whenever drought struck, the commoners would invite me to help them. Thus, they called me a witch. Yet, as my cultivation grew stronger and my reputation rose, they began calling me Little Rainbringer. I am indebted to the cult master for holding me in high regard and bestowing upon me the position of hall master of the Rain Hall. However, compared to the cult mistress, I am still inferior. Back then, it was she who became saintess, not I." Qin Mu was utterly bewildered. How does one fight using spells? Rain Hall Master pressed a hand to her forehead and sighed. How can you know nothing at all? The feud between the School of Spells and the School of Battle Techniques has endured through the ages. In the past, those who cultivated spells and those who cultivated battle techniques would always fight to the death. Each school deemed the other heresy and sought to wipe the other out. Now everyone may dwell together in harmony, but in bygone days, if you ran to a divine arts practitioner and said you cultivated battle techniques, you would be minced to pieces in the next instant. The battle prowess of spellcasters is far more terrifying than you imagine. Qin Mu asked with curiosity, "Are sword control techniques considered spells?" "No, they are not." Rain Hall Master shook her head. Sword control techniques were deemed battle techniques in the past. Later, however, they claimed their own path was the true path, and that those who cultivated spells and battle techniques were treading an unorthodox road, and thus deserved death. That is why the Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor convened a conference and challenged all the powerful practitioners of battle techniques, crippling them. Did the cult mistress not tell you these things? Qin Mu knitted his brows. Why do they always fight? Are not battle techniques, sword arts, and spells all divine arts? Would it not be better to gather all their strengths into one? Rain Hall Master did not know whether to laugh or to cry. A person's energy is limited. How can one possibly have time to cultivate all three styles to a profound realm? One could spend a lifetime and exhaust all wisdom meticulously studying a single style, and still hardly reach its pinnacle. Since people cultivate different things, there will be contention over which is superior, and in the end, they cannot coexist. Qin Mu lifted his spirits and said, "Elder sister, show me some spells. I have never seen spells before." Rain Hall Master raised her slender white hand and pointed her 5 fingers downward. With a lift and a tremor, mist gathered within the room, and rain began to fall. Qin Mu watched closely and saw that once the raindrops struck the ground, they then flew up along the walls, forming an unending cycle. Rain Hall Master swept her hand, and the raindrops instantly became fine lines, like the strings of an instrument. Spreading all 10 fingers, she plucked the rain strings, and music resonated throughout the chamber. Within that music, the rain transformed into a flood dragon that surged straight toward Qin Mu. Qin Mu extended his hand and seized the weakness of the watery flood dragon, crushing it with a splash. Rain Hall Master was stunned and plucked the musical strings even faster, turning the raindrops into sharp weapons that shot toward Qin Mu from every direction at a frenzied speed. The air's temperature plunged, freezing the rain into ice and making those sharp weapons even more sinister. With his 10 fingers flicking one after another, Qin Mu shattered the sharp weapons flying at him. "So these are spells, Elder Sister. Is this move considered a spell too?" His hands abruptly ignited with blazing flames, and using his hands as blades, he swung again and again, blasting Rain Hall Master away. Rain Hall Master fell into the courtyard, and her angry yet startled voice rang out. You are a heretic of the battle technique faction, using battle techniques as spells. Stepping into the next room, Qin Mu saw a burly man with a bristly beard, seated in Caesar. Beside him rested a rectangular sword case, a bronze buckle cinched tightly around it. I am the Hall Master of the Sword Hall. The burly man did not rise. Still in Caesar, he said, You carry a sword pouch, so you should know sword skills. Today we shall compete in sword skill. Qin Mu shook his head. I have never learned sword skills before. The Sword Hall Master lifted his head in astonishment. If you have never learned sword skills, then why do you carry a sword pouch? Did Cult Mistress teach you nothing of sword skill? Qin Mu shook his head and replied, Granny said that in the village there is a man with the #1 sword skill under heaven, so she could not teach me the heavenly devil cult sword skills, lest it cause that person to refuse to teach me in the future. #1 sword skill under heaven? The Sword Hall Master stared with eyes wide open. His sharp gaze was like 2 rays of sword light piercing into Qin Mu's heart as he laughed coldly. Who dares be so arrogant? Go learn a move from him. I want to see what this so-called #1 sword skill under heaven can do against the sword arts of our sacred cult. Qin Mu blinked innocently and said, I have also learned other skills, like Thunderclap 8 strikes, Heaven Pilfering Divine Legs, Pig Slaughtering Knife skills, Spear skill, painting, hammer skills. The Sword Hall Master gently stroked his sword case and demanded icily, I only want to see the #1 sword skill under heaven. The rest is all rubbish. Qin Mu could only leave the wooden building helplessly and return to disabled elderly village, explaining to Granny C what had happened. Granny Sai grumbled in anger. Sword Hall is such a stiff-headed brute. And you too, Muer, just use your knife and chop him to pieces. Qin Mu muttered, That would be an unfair fight. Granny C took his hand and led him back to the village gate. At the gate, village chief and apothecary were still brewing tea, while the young patriarch sat before them. The 3 drank together. Village chief, the Sword Hall Master is insistent on a sword skill contest with Qin Mu. Granny C beamed. Why not teach him a thing or two? Village chief frowned and shook his head. In such a short time, even with my guidance, it would still be difficult to defeat the opponent. After all, no one knows how many years the Sword Hall Master has been steeped in sword skill. He likely has achievements of his own. You want me to teach Muer a thing or two, and then have him immediately defeat the Sword Hall Master. Wouldn't that be like reaching for the stars? But it's a good thing Muer is an overlord body, is it not? Granny C blinked innocently. Overlord body! The corners of village chief's eyes twitched, and he began to regret what he had done. After all, it had been he who insisted that Muer was the overlord body he himself had invented. Qin Mu being able to awaken his spirit embryo had already exceeded his expectations, yet he knew there were limits to everything. To make Qin Mu capable of contending with an outstanding sword expert of the devil cult in so short a time was a Herculean task. Granny C had shoved this burden onto him, and he of all people could not refuse her. Village chief muttered to himself for a moment, then said, Muer, recite for me the secret of Elixir Heart you learned from Gu Linyuan. Qin Mu immediately recited Secret of Elixir Heart once, and village chief nodded in admiration. The Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor has indeed made an accomplishment by gathering all the sword experts of the world. The sword control techniques within Secret of Elixir Heart truly possess originality. The young patriarch before him also sighed in admiration. The Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor is a genius. Village chief continued, Tell me, how did Gu Linyuan explain Secret of Elixir Heart to you? Qin Mu repeated Gu Linyuan's explanation word for word, and village chief smiled, falling silent for a time. Gu Linyuan selfishly concealed some things. He pointed out the errors within it, and Qin Mu immediately used qi to control the sword after adjusting the mistake stuck. Village chief had corrected, becoming greatly impressed when he discovered that controlling the sword became far easier and faster. The young patriarch's eyes brightened as he smiled. Gu Linyuan did not selfishly conceal anything. It is that his comprehension was limited and not as profound as brothers. You heard it but once and could fully grasp the entire profundity of Secret of Elixir Heart while he who cultivated it all his life still cultivated it wrongly. Thanks for the praise, brother. Village chief looked at Qin Mu and said at an even pace, I will not teach you sword skill. I will only teach you a single simple movement, which is stab. Stab? Qin Mu was dumbfounded. Wasn't stabbing as easy as using vital qi to control the sword and thrust forward? Why would there be a need to learn it? To stab with a sword is not as simple as you think, even if you know no sword skills. So long as you master this stabbing movement, not many sword experts in the spirit embryo realm will be able to defeat you in this world. Village chief continued. Using an ordinary sword, try controlling it with qi to stab into the pillar of the butcher's shop. Qin Mu executed Secret of Elixir Heart, and his vital qi, thick as an arm, swept up a treasure sword from his sword pouch and sent it flying toward the pillar of the butcher's shop in the village. Thud. Qin Mu's sword tip pierced through the pillar, emerging from the back. The cowherd boy then turned around to look at Village Chief. Village Chief's expression grew rigid as he coughed. Try stabbing this rock! Qin Mu's vital qi coiled and yanked the treasure sword from the pillar, and with a clang, the sharp sword pierced through the mountain rock before Village Chief. The cowherd boy once again turned back, innocently looking at Village Chief, whose expression had become completely stiff. The young patriarch felt both startled and amused, yet he could only restrain his laughter so as not to be impolite. I forgot this kid's vital qi cultivation is extremely dense. His sword skill may be utter rubbish, but with the support of such dense vital qi, the power of his stab has increased exponentially. Village Chief covered his awkwardness with a few coughs, then continued, Try stabbing through your pig slaughtering knife. A crisp clink rang out, yet this time, Qin Mu was unable to pierce through the pig slaughtering knife. It's fortunate he didn't pierce through it, or else I wouldn't have any idea how to teach him. Village Chief secretly breathed a sigh of relief and guided him patiently. So, what did you feel when you stabbed with your sword? Qin Mu pondered carefully, and his eyes suddenly lit up. I felt my vital qi was not strong enough. When controlling the sword with qi, my vital qi was somewhat obstructed at the sword tip. It felt like my whole body was filled with strength, yet I'm striking someone with my hair. The thread of vital qi was too flimsy and cannot bear all my strength. Translator Ninetails, editor Fish Creek. The young patriarch's expression turned strange. Qin Mu's vital qi, thick as an arm, was also called a vital qi thread. Was there such a thick vital qi thread? Was there such a fearsome vital qi thread? And what was this? I felt that my vital qi wasn't strong enough. He had never seen such concentrated vital qi cultivation in the spirit embryo realm. They youth from disabled elderly village had managed to thrust through a wooden pillar as thick as a water barrel with a single strike. He had event thrust through a mountain rock that was 6 yards thick in one strike as well. The might contained within that vital qi thread had already surpassed who knew who many sword cultivators off the spirit embryo realm. Village Chief smiled and offered Qin Mu guidance. That's right. You haven't grasped the most basic movement of sword arts, and that is the stab. What if you could gather all your strength into your stab? What if you could unleash every bit of strength you possess? Qin Mu found it hard to believe and shook his head. Using qi to control the sword uses a vital qi thread to move the sword, but the vital qi thread is simply too soft. How can it unleash all of my strength? It's possible. Village Chief said unhurriedly, Treat the sword as part of your body, just like your hand. Now raise your hand and imagine you're holding a sword in your hand. With your index and middle finger resting on the blade of the sword, thrust your hand out, and the blade will follow. Treat it as part of my body? Qin Mu was bewildered. His arm-thick vital qi once again swept up the treasure sword, with his right hand grasping empty air. His thumb pressed down on his ring finger and little finger, while his index and middle finger extended straight, as though placed upon the blade of a sword. Qin Mu thrust forward and heard a shriek. His vital qi carried the treasure sword to thrust out, cleaving the air and releasing a piercing screech. He was startled and overjoyed. When he had used qi to control the sword just now, the strength within the sword had been at most 10% of his own strength. Yet now he felt the power in the sword surge by several times. The young patriarch smiled. This is called Secrets of Sword Clutch, the introductory form of sword cultivation. Just now you pierced through mountain rock without using any sword secrets. It seems your vital chi density is far higher than mine back then. Village Chief shook his hand. However, it's still not enough. With only Secrets of Sword Clutch, it's impossible for him to defeat experts who have cultivated the sword path for several decades. Mu-er, let your vital chi flow out from your palm and try again. Qin Mu followed his words and coiled the vital chi from his palm onto the treasure sword. Stirring his vital chi, he thrust forward once more. Swoosh! His sword stabbed out and raised a whirlwind, within which the keen sword sound whistled, shrieking. The young patriarch's eyes twitched, immediately sensing that the force of Qin Mu's thrust had risen by 10%. For Qin Mu to gain such a tremendous enhancement from just 1 or 2 pieces of advice from the old cripple was simply formidable. Village Chief shouted, "The vital chi thread isn't meant to coil around the sword. It should be rooted within the sword. The sword is part of your body, and your vital chi is as well. Try again." Qin Mu's vital chi sank into the sharp sword and merged with it, instantly making him feel as though he had grown another arm. With this thrust, he immediately felt his strength like a flood finding a breach to pour through. 70 to 80% of his strength gathered into the sword as he drove another stab forward. In the village, the wind whistled as the wooden pile that Butcher always used to prop himself on was cleaved in half. Qin Mu stared blankly. His sword hadn't even touched the wooden pile. It was the sword wind that had split the wooden pile into 2. The young patriarch exclaimed in admiration. With only a few words from the old cripple, he was able to draw out Qin Mu's potential. He truly possessed astonishing attainment in sword arts. Still not enough. Village Chief continued, "Your strength hasn't been fully unleashed. Your strength may have been used on the sword, but what about your spirit embryos? Where is the strength of your spirit embryo? The spirit embryo must also hold the sword." Stab again. Qin Mu steadied himself. Within his spirit embryo divine treasure, his spirit embryo followed his movement and thrust its fingers forward. Not good enough. Where is the Secrets of Elixir Heart? Secrets of Elixir Heart not only requires you to cultivate an elixir heart, it also requires you to plant your elixir heart into your sword. Plant it into your sword now. Still not enough. Again, plant the elixir heart in your sword. That is the crucial point in Secrets of Elixir Heart. Legs to the earth is the source of strength. Use the leg techniques Cripple taught you to borrow strength from the earth. Where are your eyes? Where is heaven's eyes that blind taught you? Let your sword grow eyes too. The punches you learned from old Ma temper your muscles like a dragon. You've also seen a real dragon before, so why doesn't your sword possess the dragon's majestic aura and the destruction within old May's punches? Qin Mu practiced his thrust again and again while Village Chief's expectations climbed higher and higher. First, he demanded he adjust his own strength. Then he demanded he adjust the strength of his vital chi, followed by the strength of the spirit embryo as well. And then he required him to incorporate old Ma's fists and Cripple's legs into the sword movement, increasing the difficulty. In only a short while, he had thrust countless times. However, Village Chief still remained dissatisfied and made him continue practicing. Granny C, Cripple, and the rest watched Qin Mu practicing sword, and their faces filled with shock. Every time the sword thrust out, there would be a short, urgent whistle, followed by a violent gust that swept to both sides. The flags on blacksmith, apothecary, and butcher's shops were blown backward by it. With every thrust he made, a sword mark would be carved upon the ground. That was the result of sword wind brushing past the earth. Granny C muttered in disbelief. In just a short time, Village Chief managed to train Mu-er into a sword arts expert. This is simply too... Village Chief shook his head. I didn't teach him any sword skill. I merely helped him organize his strengths, piece together what all of you taught him. Now he has only learned the basics of stabbing, and still has quite a long way to go before mastering the true stab. Furthermore, there are still hack, curve, parry, wave, poke, jab, intercept, raise, and so forth among the basic movements of swordplay. Only when he masters all these basic movements can he be considered to have stepped through the door and be qualified to learn sword skills. Mu-er, try stabbing your pig slaughter knife. As soon as he finished speaking, Qin Mu tossed his pig slaughtering knife into the air and controlled his sword to stab it like lightning. Clank! The sharp sword met the pig's slaughtering knife and pierced through the treasure knife forged from winter crystal iron. The pig slaughtering knife fell to the ground together with the sharp sword as Qin Mu stood dazed, then hurried forward to take a look. He had never expected he could improve so greatly in such a short time. Stab, the most basic movement of sword arts, could actually possess such power. Village Chief's heart jolted. It was also beyond his expectations that Qin Mu could master stab so quickly. Mu'er, you can meet the Sword Hall Master now. Hold it. The young patriarch before him hurriedly lifted his hand, and a wooden club flew over from the forest. Extending a finger, he shaved the wooden club into a wooden sword about a yard long and handed it to Qin Mu. Use this sword to meet him, and don't use a real sword. Qin Mu took the wooden sword and glanced at Granny Sai. Granny Sai explained, Sword Hall Master has sealed his other divine treasures and only left his spirit embryo divine treasure open. With only spirit embryo realm cultivation, you will stab him to death if you use a real sword. Go now. Qin Mu pondered for a moment, then placed his sword pouch as well as his junior protector sword at the village entrance. Carrying the wooden sword on his back, he returned into the wooden building next door to meet the Sword Hall Master. The Sword Hall Master was still sitting seiza, with his hand atop his sword case. With a piercing gaze, he asked, You're back from consulting the #1 sword expert in the world? Use what you've learned and attack me. I would like to see who dares be so arrogant as to call himself #1. Qin Mu shook his head. I didn't learn any sword skill. Village Chief only taught me a movement. The Sword Hall Master frowned and said coldly, I'll give you time. Go learn again. Come back and face me once you've learned a sword move. Qin Mu replied awkwardly, Your Heavenly Devil Cult Patriarch asked me to come face you with a wooden sword instead of a real sword, in case I stab you to death. Ridiculous! The Sword Hall Master's aura burst forth, and the surroundings filled with an acrid atmosphere. Within it rang the clashing of metal, as though countless swords were colliding with one another. It carried the smell of iron and blood mixed together. The scent of rust and the reek of blood intertwined. Who knew how many humans and living beings had been slain to forge such an aura? His sword case unbuckled on its own, and the rectangular case sprang open, releasing all the treasured swords stored within. The swords hummed loudly as they flew out in joyful fervor. He shared the same emotions with his swords. When he was happy, his swords were happy. When he was angry, his swords were angry. When he wished to fly, his swords carried him to the heavens, and when he wished to kill, his swords slaughtered. He was the Sword Hall Master, the sword maniac. Now he wished to kill, and so the swords in the case shot forth, and in a breath, sword lights filled the entire room. Without thinking, Qin Mu used qi to control the sword and stabbed forward with secrets of sword clutch. The sword lights burst out from the sword case, and with a soft clank, the sword lights shattered into fragments. Bang! The Sword Hall Master blasted through the wall behind him in a flash and smashed into the wooden building opposite with a wooden sword protruding from his chest. Qin Mu leapt in shock and hurriedly withdrew his sword, then looked it over. Only when he saw there was merely a bit of blood at the sword tip, and it had not pierced through the Sword Hall Master's body, did he let out a sigh of relief. On the opposite wooden building, the Sword Hall Master's body slowly slid down. He fell faster and faster through the air and landed on the ground on his butt. His eyes were lifeless, as though he were still in a daze. Are you all right? Qin Mu waved at him. The Sword Hall Master shook his head dully. His body wasn't badly injured, but his spirit had been crushed.